Good morning. My name is Ivan, and here's Elijah. We're from Studio 44. In 2017, there was an international competition for the new museum of the Siege of Leningrad. We took the first prize, and now, a year later, we have signed the contract with the city of St. Petersburg, and are in the process of developing the design. The plot allocated by the city for this purpose is close enough to the city center and is large enough for a public institution. The plot has a rather weird shape of a water drop, as the area around it has been reserved for a future underground transport tunnel. And the competition also included proposals for the area around the museum site, and we proposed to turn it into a large park. Our museum will be an integral part of its landscape. The Siege of Leningrad was an overwhelmingly major, no doubt the most tragic and quite recent event in the city's history. In 1941, the city of Leningrad was encircled by the enemy's armies within a matter of months, and the city was completely cut off by land. And in the course of 872 days of the siege, almost 1 million citizens died of starvation and cold. And every family in the city has been affected by the siege in one way or another. And there are numerous memorials and exhibitions from the Soviet time scattered through the city. In addition, there is a well of personal memorabilia in practically every St. Petersburg home, and the experience of the siege is still being processed, interpreted, and reinterpreted by practically every citizen. And the new museum will bring all of this together and tell a comprehensive story of this period in our history in a clear and contemporary language. And we have to say that for us as well, this project is deeply personal for everyone on our team, because we were born in St. Petersburg. On the one hand, it's a war memorial, a symbolic form visible through the trees from quite long way away. It's not so much a building as it's a piece of landscape, a sculpture on a hill, a sculpture made out of local granites, the same stone that all St. Petersburg embankments are made of. And these somber abstract volumes stand for the besieged city itself, its burned and disfigured walls, its cross-taped windows. And people of St. Petersburg habitually think of its city as an active agent with a mind of its own. So the building and the streets are alive, they have their own story, own sufferings, and fight their own battles. The centripetal forces of the siege makes the building stand, so to speak, shoulder to shoulder, huddled together with irregular angles between them. And they're submerged in a vast conical earth mound almost by half their height. And the geometry of the museum is an attempt to express the struggling forces of wartime. The city is surrounded from all sides, is striving to break through the ring. And the metaphor of the city is also a structural principle for the interior museum space. It's a kind of compressed city, compressed with streets, buildings, flats, and citizens, and the narrow space between the buildings is a reference to the deep courtyards of the non-glamorous St. Petersburg, spaces where people actually lived. And each part of the exhibition is dedicated to one aspect of life under siege. And there are various types of exhibition spaces, so some buildings have floors, some kept void, different spaces to tell the different stories. The exhibition space is bounded by a media wall where the timeline of the siege is displayed, and following the timeline is one of the routes the museum visitor can take to experience the display. It's the simplest and the official route, if I may say so, but the urban landscape in the center leaves opportunity for variety of different paths, so there is no one prescribed path to walk by the exhibition. And attempts to break through the encirclement and to establish a link with the mainland are emphasized by 3 gaps in the media wall leading to special exhibition spaces dedicated to the corresponding events on the timeline. And the cubic space at the end of the timeline is devoted to post-war regeneration of the city, and on the roof of this cube there is a remembrance grove accessible from the park. So here you can see the exhibition interior, and the core is a sort of a compressed city, a compressed labyrinth of walls, personal experiences, tragedies, and stories. So that's how it all looks like from outside. The lower part of the hill, it's an open amphitheater, tended to be green during the summer, but it's winter now. Here's the main entrance, and we'll take a short walk through the exhibition. Here's a part of the media wall. And there are some quiet spaces where you can listen to some personal memories recorded on tape. Well, this is a raw sketch pretty much, just an attempt about what the exhibition could look like. But our goal was, we wanted to create different types of spaces that can give more opportunities to design the museum exhibition later. But exhibition space is not the only thing in a museum, and most probably not even the most important one. It's a multifunctional, complex system. There is an educational center, research center, library, storage spaces, offices, performance center, restaurant. Therefore, you can say that it is itself a city. So here's the ground level. You can see that the exhibition is isolated in the center, and the moat around it serves to provide natural light to the offices on its other side. And there is a gradual descent from the entrance door to the exhibition. The walk down serves to separate one type of space from another and prepares visitor to enter a different world separated by the moat. And on the ground level, the 4 emergency exit ramps divide the museum into functional zones. The main entrance lobby with ticket and information desk. Here you enter and exit the exhibition. There is a staircase that leads up to the temporary display area, which is in this cube with the grove on top. And the lobby is also linked with the educational center. The next, clockwise, is a research center with a separate entrance. You can work with archives and library here. Next, the staff entrance and the main museum loading area, and then performing arts center with a black box and chamber music concert hall. As we go a level down, a single circular corridor brings together the 4 functional zones that are separated on the level above. And on the lowest level, in the center, there is the double height storage area with windows from where you can look inside. And here are the 2 performing center auditoriums, the museum restaurant, and the space around the storage space is going to be equipped with display cases to exhibit the personal donated documents related to the siege. And all in all, it's a large performance center lobby. Here on the section, you can see the moat and the offices around it. And these little courtyards with trees also serve as emergency exit for the second level of the exhibition space. If we take a look at our museum in the context of the city, this volume in the park is located on a river bend, so it's sort of pivotal point. And the museum highest point is 25 meters, a little under the restriction of 28. And the museum will become a key element of a new large city park. And we propose to devote a part of it to communal gardening as a historical reference. During the siege, every public garden was turned into cabbage rows. And despite the memorial nature of the whole complex, the open green amphitheater surrounding the museum will make it not only a place of remembrance, but also a place where one could sit on the steps, read a book, enjoy nature. And so this combination of abstract monumentality and everyday life around it will bring forward the impression that we want to linger that of the city that remains standing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Another fascinating project on a really interesting programme. Paul, why don't you kick us off?
Well, gosh, the opening photographs, harrowing. I was in Nanjing recently, which suffered a terrible fate as well. You talked about the experience of the siege still being processed by future generations, and this project bringing the processing together. And that I understand, and I understand it very clearly. And I think you've made the case absolutely for that whole part of the project. But for me, there has to be a forward. There has to be a future. You started to answer my question when you showed the museum and the research centre. But I still have a lingering question in my mind, which is bringing the past to the present so that we realise the dangers of the future is critical. The building's role in the citizens' lives is critical. It's also got a role for future generations and people way outside St. Petersburg and Russia to warn us all of the dangers of this world. So I'd just like you to talk about how that side of it comes into this building.
Well, I have to say that it's maybe this building now, it's maybe too dramatic. And that's, in our town, there are talks about should it be maybe a little bit lighter or something. But we believe that for the new generations, it's really important to just try to put them in this really uncomfortable situation, because with the time only the good things and nice remembrance rests.
Well, whatever that is that the future generations should learn from this experience, we cannot really predict now. I mean, we can provide the space for memory and the space for research and a comfortable, convenient space which should store everything there is to know. But really, what the future generations are to learn from such a horrific thing, I don't think it's our place to decide, and we cannot predict. I mean, we can provide space, and the research will go on, and people will work, and they will discover new facts and all that sort of thing. But I don't think we can really predict what they will come up with.
If I may, his answer went a long way towards satisfying me. It's the balance of the starkness with the sunshine of the future.
Yeah.
I just leave it there.
Yeah.
Christine.
Thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. You've just mentioned a moment ago that there's discussion about the building being quite monumental and whether in fact it should be, I think in your words, lighter. I was actually going to ask a question about the balance between, if you like, the scale of the Siege of Leningrad, which was absolutely huge, and then what it means to families, which is the loss of an individual. And you were saying at the outset that almost every single apartment has got some form of memorabilia about the Siege of Leningrad and presumably about the loss of a relative. And I just wonder how you balance, if you like, the monumentality of your display and actually the monumental presence of your architecture with the fact that for each family an individual person has been lost. So is there anywhere within the building that you actually have a much smaller scale exhibit or a much smaller scale space where, if you like, that very intimate relationship between war and loss is established?
Well, if I quite right get your question, I have to say that this is a really complicated topic, and that's why this, from one hand, it's a sort of memorial, and maybe some guys from the city government, they are okay that it's it looks fascinating, or not correct word, sorry, but in this, I mean, they have to build the museum for the siege of Leningrad because it's a really important topic. It's from one hand, but another there is a personal stories, and as I said that there is a display cases near the storage area, which can, like literally, you can bring something that you want to show to the citizens, and we are always balancing between this official story and the personal stories, and that's why there is just one prescribed path, which is the timeline, which is like, you know, timeline of the siege. That's okay. You know what happened these days, and the center there is a labyrinth, sort of. Actually, it's not, because you can find where the exit is in case, but there are different stories, and you can like find your own view on this event. I don't know if I answered, but maybe something.
Yeah, well, there are various spaces there in the center, which well, four of the big towers, they tell some elaborate stories of different aspects of life, and four others which are empty, they sort of silent witnesses to horrors and that sort of thing, and that's absolutely conceptually different kind of space. And well, there are lots of variety, that sort of thing.
Karen.
Okay, I just want to ask a question, two questions. The one is, in your process, has there been any citizens' input at one level? And then the other one, can you just talk a little bit about the materials? Because you talk about this official versus personal. And is there any in the manifestation of the architecture that allows us to read that?
Well, could I start with the second one?
Yeah.
In terms of materials, we tried, you know, to make each building has his own face. So there were black one, and we supposed that the exhibition there should be about the air raids, for example. And I mean, the choice of the stone is somehow corresponding to what would be exhibited inside, and that's about the materials. And this one, rosy, if I can say it so. It's a common granite in St. Petersburg.
So all the buildings, are they stone?
Yeah, except one which is from concrete.
Okay.
And the first question, I'm sorry, I forgot. And
No, I just asked, I was intrigued on whether any citizens contributed to your process.
Well, actually, it's a topic, you know, in St. Petersburg about this museum.
It's much resonance.
And during the competition stage, there were lots of talks with the kids of Siege, which are still here, and so they were one of the people who decided which one should be. Sorry for my English. It's not fluent this morning.
There's quite a lot of criticism for this building, and it's of a very nature. Well, the spectrum of criticism is usually between whether it is a tragedy museum or a war glorious victory museum or something like that. And since we get criticism from the both sides, well, probably got the balance just right.
How long? Why was there anything like this before? Nothing. I mean, given that it's such a profound and important event in in history,
Tell the story about the.
Yeah. Well, the museum, the Siege of Leningrad itself, it started very early after the war, but it was closed by Stalin because the theme was quite a taboo. It didn't run square with the idea of a glorious victory in the war. So, well, a million of starved to death civilians. It's not quite the right way of
so
thinking about it. So it was closed,
needed a decent interval to.
Yeah, and then it was reborn. The old museum, it was reborn after the Perestroika, and there are lots of small memorials scattered around the city and on the front lines of the Leningrad front. So there are lots of tiny stuff. But the scale of this one is, it's the first one to be there.
We really need a new space because we believe that it's the topic, the story that we try to tell to the whole world actually. So we really need a space to tell this story.
Paul wants to ask one more
Well, it's a
question.
very quick one. I believe that the siege was eventually broken by the water freezing and the movement across the water of supply vehicles. You're on the river's edge. It's the salient of the river's edge. We haven't asked you about the building and the water, and this building's on high land overlooking the water. So how did that enter your thinking?
From this amphitheater, there is a really great view because it's a river bend. That's one point. Another one, there is a cathedral nearby, and we thought that these like towers a little bit. They're in a sort of dialogue with the cathedral with 5 things. It's not much about water, but from the amphitheater you can see the water, and it's on the river bend, and
It's visible from the 3 sides from water, because it's really a major river bend that's a pivotal point, and it's visible from everywhere. And that's our basic idea was to make as little of a boundary between the space around the park around and the river space and the building.
I think that idea of the public being able to kind of inhabit it, but not get into it, but still be able to see it. I think that's a really powerful,
we do hope
powerful
so.
concept.
Thank you.
And I hope that it doesn't. Your presentation was, I think, very somber, and that kind of suits the mood. And I hope it doesn't become
It's
too.
just black and white pictures, you know.
I hope when it gets built that it doesn't. It still has that kind of punch, which I think suits the subject.
Yeah, we hope so.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Stay there, and I'll get yours.